He came in every Tuesday at 7:12 a.m., never spoke, never stayed, just dropped exactly $1.75 on the counter and took a plain cinnamon roll. No name, no smile, just a shadow in a hoodie with duct-taped shoes and a hunger that went deeper than food. But when a storm hit and he showed up soaked, trembling, and silent, the bakery owner finally asked one question. "You all right, kid?" What followed wasn't just an answer. It was a revelation that would change the town and a story that would echo for generations. The bell above the bakery door gave its usual cheerful chime as it swung open, its jingle nearly lost in the bustle of the morning crowd. Flour dust hung faintly in the sunbeams, slicing through the storefront windows, giving the whole place a golden haze. Customers bustled in and out, clutching boxes of croissants, loaves of seeded rye, or steaming cups of coffee. Behind the counter, elbows deep in trays of sticky buns, was Mr. Harold Santee, Mr. H to most people in town. He'd owned the Cornerstone Bakery for over 35 years, ever since he'd inherited the place from his father, who'd opened it after returning from war. Mr. H had seen every kind of customer walk through that door: hurried parents, groggy students, truck drivers from the interstate, and the same old couple who still held hands every Saturday morning as they split a cherry Danish. But one kid stuck out. He was tall for his age, but slouched as if trying to shrink, wearing a navy hoodie even in warm weather and shoes with soles so thin they might as well have been paper. His hair always fell into his eyes. He never said a word, just walked in, left exactly $1.75 on the counter, and took a plain cinnamon roll from the bottom tray, the kind most people overlooked, every Tuesday, 7:12 a.m. At first, Mr. H thought it was a one-time thing, a kid dropping in with spare change, but then he came back. And then again, always the same routine, always silent, never a greeting, never a smile. He didn't even wait for change, just dropped the coins, took the roll, and left. The kid would slide through the door like a shadow and vanish down Maple Street before anyone thought to ask his name. Mr. H started calling him Ghost Boy. Not out loud, of course. He wasn't cruel, it was just... The kid seemed like he existed on the edges of things, edges of crowds, edges of light, edges of notice. He wasn't afraid, not exactly, but cautious, like someone who'd learned not to expect kindness, like someone who knew how easily places turned cold. It bugged Mr. H more than he wanted to admit. One morning, when the shop was particularly slow, he asked Janet, his longtime cashier and partner in cinnamon roll conspiracy, if she knew the boy. "The one with the hoodie?" she asked, looking out the window. "Yeah, tall, hair in his eyes, never talks, leaves coins." Janet shook her head slowly. "He go to Ridgeline High? He's got the look." Mr. H nodded. "But I don't think he carries a backpack." They watched the door together the next Tuesday, 7:11, 7:12. Right on cue, the door chimed. The boy stepped in like he always did. This time, Mr. H didn't look away. He was thinner than he remembered. Not just lanky, but hollow-cheeked. His hoodie sleeves were frayed near the cuffs. His shoes were worse than before, patched with duct tape along the sides. He didn't make eye contact, didn't hesitate, just laid the coins down, 6 quarters, 2 dimes, and a nickel, then reached for the cinnamon roll. He paused only when he saw them watching, just for a second, long enough for Mr. H to see something flash across the boy's face. Embarrassment, maybe fear. Then he was gone. Mr. H crossed his arms. "That kid's not okay." Janet didn't argue. They didn't speak of it again for a few weeks, but the boy kept coming. The coins were always exact. The routine never changed, until one day it did. It was raining that morning, not a gentle mist, but the kind of storm that flattens trees and floods basements. Still, at 7:12 the door creaked open, and the boy stepped in, soaked to the bone. He hadn't even tried with an umbrella. His hoodie was plastered to his back, and his hands were shaking as he dropped the coins. They clinked louder than usual. He looked miserable, pale, exhausted. The kind of tired that doesn't come from lack of sleep, but from carrying too much alone. Mr. H said something then, just a simple, "You all right, kid?" The boy froze like someone had grabbed his arm. He blinked, looked at the counter, then shook his head once, just barely. Before Mr. H could ask anything else, the boy was gone. That night Mr. H lay awake longer than he cared to admit. The bakery was just a shop, a place to serve people pastries and coffee. He wasn't a social worker or a therapist, but something about that kid, it gnawed at him. He asked around the next day, quietly, subtly. Teachers from Ridgeline High didn't know a boy matching that description. No police reports had come through about a missing kid. One of the mail carriers thought she'd seen someone matching the boy's shape climbing out from the back of the abandoned lot behind the church. The church hadn't been used in years. On Thursday, Mr. H made a choice. He packed a cinnamon roll in a paper bag, added a banana and a small carton of chocolate milk, and wrote a note on the outside. "Hey, no charge today. Be well, Mr. H." The next Tuesday, the boy arrived on time. The bag was waiting. He stared at it for a long time before reaching out. His fingers hesitated, touched the paper like it might burn him. Then he took it and left without a word. The coins were still on the counter. That night, Mr. H told Janet, "I think he's sleeping rough." Janet's eyes widened. "What, like homeless?" "Looks that way, or close to it." They started leaving the bag out every Tuesday. Sometimes the boy took it, sometimes he didn't. But the coins always remained, perfectly counted. Then one week the boy didn't come. 7:12 passed, 7:20, 7:45. The roll remained untouched. The bag sat alone on the counter. He didn't show up the next week either, or the one after that. Mr. H checked the local paper. No accidents reported, no arrests, no missing persons, nothing. It bothered him more than it should have. Then, a month later, the boy came back. Same hoodie, but thinner than ever. Gaunt. Trembling. He didn't take a cinnamon roll this time. Just stood there. Mr. H stepped around the counter slowly. "You need help?" The boy opened his mouth like he was going to speak, but no words came out. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a note, folded twice. He held it out. Mr. H took it and unfolded it with care. The handwriting was tight, careful, as if written in a library. It said, "My name is Caleb. My mom left 2 years ago. My dad drinks. I sleep in the church boiler room. I'm trying to get a job. Thank you for the food. I leave coins because I don't want to steal. I don't want to be invisible." Mr. H read it 3 times, then looked up, but Caleb was already gone. That night, he drove to the church, walked around the back in the dark with a flashlight, found the rusted door half covered by ivy. It opened with a groan. Inside was a narrow stairwell. It smelled of mildew and rust. He followed it down, found the boiler room, a sleeping bag, a flashlight, a stack of books, a crate filled with cans, and a battered portable radio. And next to all of it, a stack of clean bakery bags. Mr. H went home that night with his hands shaking. He didn't sleep. The next morning he made calls, a friend of his from the city council, another from the school board. By Thursday, he'd arranged a meeting with a woman from a housing nonprofit. They talked options, legalities, risks. On Tuesday, the cinnamon roll sat on the counter again, but this time, Mr. H didn't stay behind the counter. He waited by the door. At 7:12 it opened. Caleb stepped in. He froze when he saw Mr. H. "Hey," Mr. H said gently. "I got something to show you." Caleb didn't move. Mr. H held up a bag, not paper this time, but canvas. Inside was a key. "You don't have to say yes, but there's a room. Safe, warm, just for you." Caleb didn't take the bag at first. He just stood there, the weight of 100 quiet Tuesdays pressing down on him all at once. Then he stepped forward and took it. That night it rained again. The kind of cold, sideways rain that seeped into your bones. The kind of rain that made even the most hardened delivery drivers curse under their breath. But Mr. H didn't mind. He sat in his truck, with the engine running just enough to keep the defroster going, headlights cutting through the mist like old memories. The keys to the room, a clean spare studio above the fire station's old annex, sat in the passenger seat beside a box of warm pastries and a new toothbrush. Across the street, tucked under the stone archway of the long-abandoned church, a sliver of light glowed behind broken slats in a boarded-up basement window. Mr. H watched the faint flicker and tried to picture the boy, Caleb, somewhere beneath all that cold stone, curled up beside a boiler in a makeshift nest, hiding from the world with nothing but discipline and dignity to guide him. The note had haunted him for days. "I don't want to be invisible." It was the kind of sentence that made you ache in places you didn't realize still worked. Mr. H had spent most of his life surrounded by people, bakers, farmers, customers, friends. He knew a dozen families in town by their favorite pastry alone, but in all his years he'd never met someone like Caleb, a ghost of a boy who refused to haunt, a shadow who paid for cinnamon rolls with pride and silence. At 7:58, the sliver of light blinked out. Mr. H stepped from the truck. His boots splashed through puddles as he crossed the road. When he reached the door, he didn't knock. He simply left the box, the bag, and the envelope beside the steps. Then, with a last look at the place Caleb had called home, he turned and left. Inside the box was a handwritten note. "Your name isn't invisible to me." The next morning came with an unexpected hush. The storm had cleared sometime after midnight, leaving the streets slick and glinting under a pale gray sky. When Mr. H opened the bakery, he didn't expect anything different. Tuesdays were quiet that way, just the hum of ovens and the soft clink of trays. But when the doorbell rang at 7:12, Mr. H looked up. Caleb stood there just inside the doorway, soaked again, but not from the rain. His hair clung to his face. His clothes were the same, but there was something different in his stance, less shrinking, more unsure. In his hands was the bag, the key still inside. Mr. H walked around the counter slowly. No apron, no bakery smile, just him. "You came back." Caleb nodded. "I didn't take anything." "I left it for you," Mr. H said gently. The boy's mouth twisted, struggling with something. Words? Emotion? Pride? "You don't know me," he said. "I could be lying. I could have been stealing this whole time." "You could have," Mr. H agreed. "But you didn't." Caleb looked down at the bag, then held it out. "I don't know how to do this," he whispered. "Then let's start small," Mr. H said. "Cinnamon roll?" Caleb blinked. His eyes shimmered, but he nodded. That was the beginning. At first, Caleb didn't say much. He'd take a roll, sometimes a banana, sit at the corner table by the window, and eat in silence. Mr. H kept the pace casual, never hovered, never asked too much. He'd talk while kneading dough, tell stories about the bakery's early days, his dad, the time the mixer exploded during a wedding order. Caleb would listen, eyes down, but something in him softened each time. After a week, Mr. H asked if he wanted a job. Caleb looked stunned. "Doing what?" "Whatever you're willing to try, cleaning trays, washing up, maybe learn the register." The boy's expression flickered, a tiny war between hope and fear. "I've never worked before." "Then this'll be your first," Mr. H smiled. He started him small. A few hours after school, sweeping, wiping tables, organizing shelves. Caleb was meticulous, quiet, yes, but careful, focused. He counted inventory like it was sacred. Mr. H noticed how he always lined up the trays just right, scrubbed the corners most people missed. One afternoon as they were locking up, Mr. H finally asked, Why here? Caleb tilted his head. You could have gone anywhere for food. Why this place? The boy hesitated, then, in a voice barely above a whisper, said, My mom used to buy cinnamon rolls here when things were before everything. He paused. I remember holding her hand. She always let me carry the box. She said this place smelled like hope. Mr. H didn't say anything. He didn't have to. He just placed a hand on Caleb's shoulder and gave it a gentle squeeze. You came to the right place then. As weeks turned into months, Caleb began to change. His posture straightened, his hair was trimmed, his clothes clean. With Mr. H's help, he applied for a youth housing program and moved into the small studio legally. The town donated essentials. A neighbor gave him a bike. Someone from the church's old congregation dropped off an old laptop. He never asked for any of it, but he never refused either. Mr. H taught him how to fold dough for croissants, how to pipe custard without making a mess, how to balance the register drawer and reconcile tips. Caleb picked it up fast. Too fast. One day Mr. H caught him recalculating the week's inventory in his head faster than the software could. You any good at math? He asked casually. Caleb shrugged. I guess. Like scary good? The boy gave a rare smirk. I used to read my mom's accounting books when we didn't have internet. Mr. H raised a brow. Ever thought about doing something with that? Caleb's smile faded. Doesn't matter. I won't get into college. Why not? No parents, no grades, no address until a month ago. You really think I'll get a shot? Mr. H leaned on the counter, flour on his sleeves. I think someone who taught himself inventory management with nothing but coins and cinnamon rolls deserves more than a shot. He paused. I know someone at the community college. Let's start there. The application process wasn't easy. Caleb didn't have transcripts. He didn't have letters of recommendation. But he had one thing most people didn't: persistence. He met with advisors, tested into math courses higher than most incoming freshmen, and earned a provisional spot in the business program, conditional on his first semester grades. He started part-time. Every morning he still came to the bakery, not as a ghost, but as someone becoming real. To everyone, word started spreading. People asked about the quiet kid who now smiled when he handed over change. Customers noticed how the cinnamon rolls tasted just a little better now. A few old-timers started tipping him directly. A mother brought her daughter in just to meet the boy who folded the napkins so perfectly. And one Tuesday, long after the rain had stopped and the skies had brightened, Caleb stood behind the counter, handing out pastries with the confidence of someone who knew he belonged. That morning, Mr. H watched from the prep room, wiping his hands on a towel, eyes misting without reason. Because right there in the warmth of a Tuesday morning was a boy who'd once only left coins on the counter, and now he was the one opening the door for others. Spring came slowly that year, like a guest who wasn't sure they'd been invited. The snow melted one patch at a time, revealing sidewalks cracked with memory and trees still unsure if it was safe to bloom. But inside the Cornerstone Bakery, something had already taken root and grown tall. Caleb was no longer just the boy who worked behind the counter. He had become part of the rhythm of the place, a note in the daily melody. His name was now known to the regulars. Miss Pruitt, who came every morning for a bran muffin and stories of the 1950s, had taken to bringing him crossword puzzles. The twins from the high school track team high-fived him after their runs and left behind empty banana bread wrappers like breadcrumbs. The retired math teacher, Mr. Graham, offered him old textbooks and occasionally subtle nods of approval. But it wasn't just the bakery that was changing. Caleb was. He still wore his hoodie sometimes, though it had been washed so often the fabric clung more from habit than necessity. He still had the same eyes, always thoughtful, always searching, but now they met people's gaze. He spoke more, smiled, laughed even, though it startled him the first few times, as if the sound had been locked away for so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to hear it aloud. Mr. H watched this transformation quietly. He didn't interrupt it, didn't smother it with praise or sentimental words. He just kept baking, kept showing up, kept making space. Then one morning, as they opened shop, Caleb asked, "Did your dad ever tell you why he opened the bakery?" Mr. H looked up from his dough, surprised. He was a vet, came back from the war, didn't know what to do with himself. He said baking was the only thing he could do that didn't hurt someone. Caleb nodded, absorbing it. "I think I know what he meant." There was a beat of silence before he added, "Some days I still wake up expecting to be back in that basement, like this has all been one long dream I'm not supposed to keep." Mr. H wiped his hands and leaned against the prep table. "It's not a dream, kid. It's the result of what happens when someone refuses to disappear." Caleb didn't say anything, but his shoulders squared just a little more that day. By the time summer arrived, Caleb was working nearly full-time. He had a savings account now, paid part of his own rent, managed supplier deliveries when Mr. H had early meetings, even covered the store alone on occasion when Mr. H had his doctor's appointments or needed time to rest. And then, one Tuesday, just as the light broke through the front windows and the town was still shaking off sleep, something happened. Caleb came in early, as usual, but he didn't head straight to the kitchen. Instead, he stood in the middle of the bakery, staring at the counter. There, where customers usually dropped off tips or spare change, someone had left 3 coins, 2 quarters and a quarter-sized washer with a hole in the middle. Not money, but a message. Caleb stared at it for a long time, then picked it up slowly. Mr. H came in a few minutes later and found him still holding the coins. "What's that?" Caleb looked up. "I don't know, but it's not random." He turned over the washer. On one side, someone had scratched a number, a phone number. Mr. H felt something tighten in his chest. "You think it's your—" "I don't know," Caleb said again, "but I have to find out." Mr. H nodded. "Then we'll find out." They called the number that night. Mr. H insisted on being there, sitting just off-screen while Caleb used the landline in the back office. The phone rang 4 times before someone picked up. A woman. Her voice was hoarse, uncertain. "Hello?" Caleb froze. Then he whispered, "Mom?" The silence on the other end felt like the earth had stopped spinning. Then, "Caleb?" She started crying before he could answer, and just like that, everything he thought he'd put behind him came flooding back. The nights on the floor with no heat, the dinners skipped, the day she left without goodbye. They talked for nearly an hour. When he hung up, he didn't say much, just sat there with the receiver still in his hand, staring at nothing. Mr. H brought him a cinnamon roll and didn't ask questions. Eventually, Caleb said, "She's in rehab. She got help." Mr. H nodded. "She said she left because she couldn't look me in the eye, said she thought I'd be better off without her." "And what do you think?" Caleb shrugged. "I don't know yet." That honesty meant more than any answer could. Summer passed. Autumn arrived in a rush of gold and red. Leaves scattered across the bakery doorstep like confetti. Caleb kept working, kept going to class. His GPA was rising. He was applying for scholarships, with Mr. H helping him draft essays between batches of sourdough and shipments of flour. And slowly, cautiously, he began rebuilding something with his mother. It started with short calls, then letters, a video chat, then, one weekend in October, a visit. She stood outside the bakery at 8:01 a.m., hands trembling, hair pulled back tight like she didn't trust it to behave. Caleb opened the door. "Hi," she said. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there. Then, slowly, he reached out and hugged her. Not for long, not dramatically, but enough. Mr. H watched from inside the kitchen, eyes watering, hands still dusted in flour. He didn't interrupt. That night, Caleb sat with him in the prep room. "She's still fragile," he said, "but she's trying." "That's all any of us can do," Mr. H. replied. In November, something extraordinary happened. Caleb got a letter from the community college's dean. He had been nominated for a regional scholarship, one that would cover full tuition for the next 2 years, based on academic recovery, work ethic, personal essays, but also on a nomination letter from Mr. H. When Caleb read the letter out loud in the back room, his voice cracked halfway through. He finished it with tears running down his cheeks. "You didn't have to do this," he whispered. "I know," Mr. H. said, "but I saw you, long before anyone else did." That winter, the bakery held a fundraiser for youth housing. Caleb spoke at the event, just 5 minutes. But it was enough. He told the story of a cinnamon roll, of coins left without names, of how one man's kindness opened a door he hadn't even known was there. People cried. People donated, but more importantly, people remembered. Because now, in the heart of the town, the story of the boy who once left coins on the counter had become something larger than grief or shame. It had become a symbol of hope, of dignity, of second chances wrapped in wax paper and handed out with quiet care. The new year arrived with little fanfare, no fireworks, no parades, just the soft hush of falling snow and the sound of the town exhaling after the holidays. Inside the bakery, the lights glowed warm as ever, and the scent of cinnamon, vanilla, and yeast wrapped itself around every soul who stepped through the doors. Caleb now had a rhythm. He came in before sunrise, unlocked the doors with his own key, tied on an apron that now hung beside Mr. H's on the hook, marked "Staff," and started the prep like he'd done it his whole life. He measured flour by instinct. He could tell if a batch was proofed just by scent. The new part-timers looked to him for guidance without hesitation, and customers greeted him with nods and familiarity. He wasn't invisible anymore. One morning in February, a customer stepped in who hadn't been seen in years, Miss Helen Simmons, a retired journalist who had moved away after her husband passed. She wandered in with a cane, squinting around the bakery as though searching for something more than coffee. "I heard," she said after ordering a tea, "that the boy who used to leave coins on the counter now runs the register." Caleb chuckled. "That'd be me." She blinked. "You're not a boy anymore." He grinned. "Depends on who you ask." She studied him for a long moment. "You ever tell your story?" "I've told enough. Not the full one." He didn't reply right away, just handed her the tea and said, "Some stories don't need to be loud to be true." She nodded. "But some truths deserve to echo." That conversation sparked something. Helen returned the next day with a notebook, then again the next week. She didn't pry, she didn't push, she just asked questions, small ones, quiet ones. And Caleb answered what he could. By spring, she'd written a piece. "The Boy with the Coins, a story of dignity and dough." She submitted it to a regional magazine. They published it. The story spread further than anyone expected. Comments poured in. Letters arrived. One came from a bakery across the country offering him a paid internship, another from a nonprofit asking him to speak about youth resilience. But most surprising of all came a handwritten envelope, postmarked from just a few towns over. It was from his father. The letter was brief, apologetic, regretful in the way people are when they've run out of excuses. Caleb read it once, then folded it and placed it in a drawer without comment. Mr. H. didn't ask. That same week, Caleb's mom marked 365 days sober. She brought a cake to the bakery, lopsided, too sweet, and decorated with uneven letters. But she made it. Caleb lit the candle, just one. No one sang, no one clapped. But when he blew it out, the silence was the loudest celebration imaginable. Summer returned again. This time it came with warmth that stayed. Caleb passed his finals with honors. The scholarship was officially awarded. And on a day no different from any other, Mr. H. handed him a set of papers. "What's this?" Caleb asked. Mr. H wiped his hands on his apron. "Co-ownership forms." Caleb stared at him. "What?" "You've earned it. More than earned it. I'm not ready." "You're already doing it, kid. I'm just making it official." Caleb didn't cry, but his hands trembled when he signed. That fall, a small plaque was installed near the bakery door. It didn't say much, just, "To the boy who taught us how to see. Welcome home, Caleb." Tourists asked about it sometimes. Locals just smiled, because everyone knew. It wasn't just a plaque, it was a promise. Years passed. The bakery flourished. A second location opened. Caleb oversaw the hiring, designed the training program, even launched a community fund that helped at-risk youth find housing and part-time work. But every Tuesday morning, without fail, he arrived at the original shop at 7:12 a.m., just to remember. One morning he came in early and found a small envelope on the counter. Inside were 3 coins, 2 quarters, and a note that read, "I don't want to be invisible." Caleb stepped outside, scanned the street. He saw a boy, thin, nervous, waiting. He didn't call out. He just walked back inside, warmed a cinnamon roll, placed it in a bag with a carton of chocolate milk, and left it on the counter. When he looked up again, the boy was gone, but the coins were still there. And in that moment he smiled, not for himself, but for what was coming. Because the cycle hadn't ended, it had only begun. The light inside the bakery never faded, not through storms or silence, not through loss or loneliness. It burned warm because people like Caleb made it so, people who'd walked through the fire and still found a way to knead hope into every batch. And long after the original sign had faded and new staff cycled through, the story remained. Of a teen who left coins on the counter, and the man who finally followed him, not to chase him away, but to walk beside him into the light. The fall breeze rolled in crisp and early that year, tugging at scarves and fluttering shop signs. But inside Cornerstone Bakery, the warmth never left. If anything, it grew stronger. Business had picked up, not because of gimmicks or marketing, but because people felt something when they walked through the doors. It wasn't just the smell of buttered dough or the sound of jazz softly playing in the background. It was the feeling that this place meant something, that it remembered you, even if the rest of the world didn't. Caleb had become its heartbeat. He didn't just make pastries. He didn't just run the register. He learned names. He remembered who liked extra icing, who needed a gluten-free option, who just lost a husband and now came in for the silence between bites. He managed the back-end logistics now too, inventory orders, local vendor meetings, even accounting. It was the same math he used to do in the boiler room, only now he did it with the shop lights on and a nameplate on his desk. The plaque near the entrance stayed small and unassuming, but sometimes people stopped and read it like scripture. They would pause and look at Caleb, then at Mr. H, and something would settle behind their eyes. Respect, gratitude, a strange sort of reverence for a story that wasn't theirs but somehow made them feel seen too. Then came a letter that would change everything again. It arrived on a Thursday, slipped in with supplier invoices, a heavy envelope with a raised seal, addressed to Mr. Caleb James in elegant script. He opened it cautiously, almost suspiciously. Inside was an invitation. He'd been nominated for the National Youth Integrity Fellowship, an award given annually to a young adult who demonstrated extraordinary courage, moral strength, and community impact. It wasn't something you applied for. You were chosen. Mr. H found him sitting at the counter, holding the letter with both hands like it was a bird too fragile to keep. "You got a golden ticket?" Mr. H asked, grinning. Caleb didn't smile. "They want me to speak. In D.C. Mr. H's grin faded into something quieter. "Are you going to go?" Caleb stared at the letter. "I think I have to." He practiced in the back office every night for a week. Mr. H would listen from the kitchen, pretending to focus on the sourdough schedule, but catching every word through the thin walls. Caleb's speech wasn't grand. It didn't have metaphors or polish, but it had weight. He talked about his mom, about the boiler room, about the coins. He never once made himself the hero. "I wasn't trying to inspire anyone," he said during one rehearsal. "I just didn't want to disappear, that's all. I left those coins so I could hold on to one small piece of normal. I didn't want a handout. I just wanted someone to look at me like I was still real." And then he'd pause, take a breath. "I got that, in this bakery, from a man who didn't owe me anything." Mr. H couldn't listen to that part without needing to knead dough violently just to blink away the sting in his eyes. The night before Caleb left for D.C., the bakery stayed open late. Not to sell anything, but to celebrate. People filtered in slowly at first. Miss Pruitt with her crossword puzzles, the track twins, the math teacher with a rare smile, but before long the place was full. Someone brought a guitar. Someone else brought old photos of the bakery in the 80s. There was no schedule, no formality, just a quiet gathering of people who wanted to say one thing: "We saw you." Caleb didn't make a speech. He just sat beside Mr. H at the corner table with a slice of lemon tart and listened. The music, the chatter, the laughter. And for the first time in his life, he didn't feel like a ghost slipping through someone else's life. He felt like the frame that held the picture in place. Washington, D.C. was cold and loud. The kind of place where everything moves too fast, where even silence seems scheduled. Caleb stood backstage in a room full of polished shoes and expensive fabric, feeling more like the boy in the boiler room than he had in years. But then he thought of the bakery, the cinnamon rolls, the letter from his mom, taped beside his apartment mirror, that read simply, "I'm proud of you, no matter what happens." And he stepped onto the stage. His speech lasted 7 minutes. When he finished, the room was silent. Not the awkward kind, but the breathless kind, the kind that fills right before thunder breaks. Then they stood. All of them, not for show, but because they couldn't not. He received the award with shaking hands and didn't smile for the cameras. He smiled when he got back to his hotel room and found a voicemail from Mr. H. "You made the whole town proud, kid. Now come home. We're low on apple turnovers." Back in town, nothing had changed, and that was perfect. The sky still stretched wide. The church still stood abandoned, ivy creeping along its bones, and Cornerstone Bakery still smelled like cinnamon and salvation. But one thing was different. A boy who once left coins on a counter now had his photo in the window. Not to gloat, just to remind everyone that the invisible deserved to be seen. Years passed. Caleb graduated, bought out full ownership of the bakery when Mr. H retired, though Mr. H still showed up every morning just to sip coffee and insult Caleb's scones. The two of them argued like father and son, though neither ever used those words. They didn't need to. Caleb's mother moved into a small apartment 2 blocks from the bakery. She volunteered at the local women's shelter. They saw each other every Sunday, sometimes in silence, sometimes with stories. She never missed a birthday again, and Caleb never stopped paying attention. One day a girl came in, small, hair in her face, shoes held together by hope. She dropped coins on the counter, too many this time. She grabbed a roll and tried to flee before anyone saw her. Caleb called gently, "Hey." She froze. He walked around the counter and held out the extra coins. "You paid too much." She looked at him, startled. "You're not invisible here," he said. Then he handed her a bag with a cinnamon roll, a note, and a name. Outside, the sky turned amber with the setting sun. And inside, a boy who once left coins on the counter had become the kind of man who followed them, quietly, patiently, with the kind of grace that only those who had once vanished could ever truly offer. The bakery lights stayed on late that night, not because of business, but because hope, when baked right, needs time to rise. And Caleb James had become a master of the slow rise. The first snow of winter arrived like a whispered secret, dusting the tops of parked cars and softening the edges of rooftops with delicate precision. Cornerstone Bakery, its windows fogged with warmth, was already glowing before sunrise. The smell of caramelized sugar and melted butter curled out into the street like a homing signal for early risers and dreamers. Inside, the bakery was quiet. Caleb stood alone behind the counter, watching snowflakes drift past the window as if each one were a tiny reminder of how far he had come. The same space that once received his crumpled coins and silent footsteps now bore the rhythm of his full presence, steady, deliberate, rooted. He remembered the first winter he had spent in that broken-down boiler room beneath the church. The way he used to wake before dawn, fingers numb, breath fogging in the still air. Back then he'd wrap himself in the thinnest layer of pride and set off for the bakery, just hoping he could grab one small piece of the world that still felt real. That version of him felt like a distant cousin now, still part of him, still present, but no longer in control. Caleb adjusted the pastry display, checking the temperature gauge and making sure the cream cheese frosting hadn't begun to harden. Then he turned the sign on the door from closed to open with the reverence of a priest lifting a chalice. The first customer was a regular. He always was. An elderly man named Harris, who never said much, but always left with the same thing. One blueberry muffin, a black coffee, and $2 for the tip jar, regardless of the total. Caleb had once asked why he did it. "Because someone once helped me when I was just a face in the cold," Harris had said simply. Caleb understood. The day unfolded gently, like a story already in motion. More regulars came in, exchanging pleasantries, asking about specials, laughing softly over the clatter of forks against porcelain. Somewhere around mid-morning, a local high school student named Lana came in. She'd just started helping out at the shop 2 afternoons a week, part of a school-to-work program that Caleb himself had helped propose. "Morning," she chirped. "We've got a line forming down the street." "Snow does that," Caleb smiled. "People get nostalgic. They crave cinnamon." She laughed. "It's like the smell flips some memory switch in their heads." Caleb glanced at the tray of fresh rolls. "We all need switches like that." The two of them worked through the rush with the quiet choreography of a place that ran on intention and instinct. Caleb taught her how to align the napkins just right, how to top the croissants with egg wash so they gleamed like gold, how to speak gently to customers who were clearly having a bad day. By the time noon hit, the bakery was full. Mr. H came by with a stack of newspapers and a grin, plopping into his usual seat and pretending not to beam with pride as he watched Caleb run the shop. "You missed a spot on the window," he called out. Caleb glanced over without missing a beat. "You missed a spot on your retirement," Mr. H chuckled and waved him off. "Let an old man dream." The rhythm of the place settled back into its lull. A warm hum of conversation and comfort wrapped the room. That's when Caleb saw it. Another envelope, not mailed this time, left on the counter. No name, no return address. Just folded white paper, heavy in the hand. Caleb stared at it for a long moment before picking it up. Inside there were no words, just a photograph. A boy, maybe 12, maybe younger, standing on the church steps, face blurry but unmistakable, in his hand a Cornerstone Bakery bag. On the back of the photo, written in small, careful print, "Thank you. You gave me back my name." Caleb felt the air go still around him. He looked up, scanned the room, but whoever had left it was already gone. Later that night, when the shop had closed and the floors had been mopped, Caleb stood alone behind the counter, the photograph in his hand. He remembered that moment. He remembered the boy. Not just the one in the photo, but the one he had once been. The one who used to walk in with coins. The one who couldn't ask for help. The one who thought survival was the highest thing he could hope for. And now, years later, he realized that hope hadn't been the destination. It had been the beginning. The story of Caleb James and Cornerstone Bakery became more than local folklore. Newspapers picked it up, documentarians reached out. A small production company proposed a short film. Caleb was grateful, but careful. He didn't want his story to become performance. He didn't want to be a symbol that people praised instead of a boy they once ignored. But he said yes to a podcast interview. It was recorded late one evening, the host asking quiet questions, and Caleb answering with the same honesty that had carried him through every storm. "I didn't want a handout," he said. "I didn't want pity. I just wanted a place where I could still act like I belonged." That's what those coins were. That's what the cinnamon roll was. A way to stay human in a world that forgot how to look at people. The host asked him what advice he'd give to someone in that situation now. Caleb paused. "Pay attention," he said. "Look twice. Some people are only one kind word away from coming back to life." Spring rolled in slowly, a blush of green over rooftops and the first yellow blooms nudging their way out of thawed soil. The bakery planted a small garden box outside the window, herbs mostly, a few flowers, a little rosemary, which Caleb insisted was for flavor and not just aesthetics. A few weeks later, a group of students from the high school asked if they could do a project on him. He declined politely, then compromised. They could do a project on the bakery. "Make it about the people," he said. "Not me." They came every afternoon for 2 weeks, snapping photos, interviewing customers, writing down stories. When they presented it, the title read, "Cornerstone, the place that remembers you." Caleb stood in the back of the auditorium that night, watching the slideshow. It was full of moments: a smiling customer, a young barista piping frosting onto cupcakes, Mr. H waving with a coffee cup. And in the final slide, a simple image, a folded paper bag with a single cinnamon roll inside. The screen faded to black, and the room filled with applause. Another year passed. Cornerstone opened a third location. Caleb trained each new manager personally, not with manuals, but with stories. He told them about the way Mr. H had greeted every customer like a neighbor, about the girl who once cried over banana bread because it reminded her of her late grandmother, about the boy who left coins on the counter praying not to be seen, but praying even harder to be found. He never mentioned his name in that story. He didn't have to. One quiet evening, long after the sun had set and the bakery was closed, Caleb stood alone at the window, watching the streetlights flicker. He heard the door creak. It wasn't locked. A boy walked in, young, thin, nervous. He didn't say anything, just stepped forward and placed something on the counter, a crumpled dollar and a few coins. Caleb looked at the boy looked back. And without a word, Caleb reached behind the counter, pulled out a cinnamon roll, warm, soft, fresh, from the batch he'd saved, and placed it gently into a paper bag. He slid it across the counter. The boy took it. No questions, no hesitation. And for the first time in maybe weeks, maybe months, the boy smiled. Just a little. Then he turned and walked into the night. Caleb watched him go, and the bakery light stayed on, because somewhere out there another story had just begun, and this time someone would be there to follow. The days that followed blurred into each other like the soft swirl of cream into coffee. The bakery never stopped. The dough kept rising, the ovens kept glowing, and the bell above the door kept ringing with its familiar chime. But something was different now. Not louder, not bolder, just deeper. It was as though the story Caleb had been living, the one stitched together by quiet Tuesdays and careful coins, had finally wrapped itself around the walls of Cornerstone Bakery like ivy, finding home on brick. And because of that, something had shifted in how people walked through the door. There was more than hunger behind their eyes. There was recognition. People didn't just come for cinnamon rolls anymore. They came because they'd heard, maybe in a podcast, maybe in a cousin's voice, maybe whispered from someone who had seen the look in Caleb's eyes and understood. They came because they believed, even if just for a few minutes, that a place still existed where dignity was baked into the crust. And with each one who came, Caleb offered not just food, but presence. A woman came one morning clutching a worn-out tote bag. Her son had run away, she said. 16. She was leaving flyers. "He's good," she whispered. "Just scared?" Caleb took the flyer, scanned the picture. "I'll keep an eye out," he said. And he meant it. A week later, a boy wandered in with his hoodie pulled low and hands shoved into his sleeves. He asked for a roll but wouldn't meet Caleb's eyes. Caleb recognized the face. He didn't say anything, just rang him up, slid over the roll, and tucked the flyer into the trash when the boy wasn't looking. The next day, the boy was back. The day after that, Caleb gently said, "Your mom's been looking." The boy didn't run. He just looked tired. And in the softest voice, he asked, "Do you think she'd still want me?" Caleb placed a second roll in the bag. "Come back tomorrow," he said. "We'll figure it out." Mr. H still came by, not every day now, but often enough. He claimed retirement had made him too soft for the bakery grind, but his eyes lit up every time he saw a new kid working the counter or a customer reading the plaque by the door. One afternoon, he sat with Caleb on the back bench behind the shop, the sun low and golden between them. "You ever miss the way it used to be?" Mr. H asked. Caleb thought for a moment. "I miss not knowing how hard it gets," he said, "but I don't miss being invisible." Mr. H nodded. "You gave that up, piece by piece, roll by roll." Caleb smiled. "You followed me. That changed everything." "You gave me someone worth following," Mr. H replied. They didn't speak after that, just watched the clouds move like sails across the sky. At some point, people began calling Caleb's story the Coin Boy Tale. He never liked that. He wasn't a tale. He was a person, but he understood. Stories like his made it easier for others to come forward. Slowly, carefully, more and more people began sharing. Stories of foster homes, of sleeping in cars, of leaving coins in libraries hoping someone would just notice them. The bakery became a meeting point for those stories, a place to speak softly without judgment. So Caleb created something new. He called it the Cornerstone Quiet Fund. Customers could add 50 cents to their purchase. The money went to local shelters, to emergency motel nights, to backpacks filled with food and socks and toothpaste for kids who needed a pause in their running. No fanfare, no thank you notes, just small acts of quiet mercy. The first time the fund helped a girl fleeing a bad home situation, Caleb stayed up the whole night. He wasn't anxious. He wasn't overwhelmed. He just couldn't stop smiling. Years later, long after Caleb's hair began showing specks of gray, and the bakery had expanded to 4 locations, a journalist visited for a retrospective. She was doing a series on American cornerstones, and someone had told her she needed to see the place where coins once told a story. She expected a gimmick, a branded logo, some nostalgic packaging. Instead, she found a shop that still smelled like hope and cinnamon, and a man with flour on his sleeves who still believed in listening before talking. She asked him what had kept him going all those years. Caleb thought for a long time, then said, "Because I remember what it was like to need something more than food. I needed a reason to come back tomorrow, and someone gave me that. So now I make sure this place always gives it too." She blinked hard, then turned off her recorder. "I needed to hear that," she said. Caleb handed her a cinnamon roll. "No charge," he said with a smile, "but you'll leave the coins anyway, won't you?" She laughed. "I might." When Caleb finally retired, the town held a ceremony in the town square. Not because he asked, because they couldn't not. The mayor spoke. The choir sang. And in a moment no one would ever forget, kids from all over, some now adults, some still fighting for footing, came forward with paper bags. One by one they placed them at the base of the podium. Each bag had a cinnamon roll and a single coin, some shiny, some old, all of them sacred. The crowd stood in silence, the kind that makes your chest swell and your eyes sting. Caleb stepped forward, his voice steady. "Cornerstone was never about me," he said. "It was about what happens when you stop looking past people, when you lean in instead of walking by. I was never just a boy with coins. I was a boy waiting to be seen." He held up one of the paper bags. And look what happened when someone looked. That night, the bakery lights stayed on long past closing. Inside, the walls hummed with memory of cinnamon and conversation, of folded notes and returned glances, of coins left behind not in desperation, but in trust. And behind the counter, now manned by a teenager with a story of her own, the cycle continued. Because somewhere out there another Caleb was walking the edges of sidewalks, holding dignity like a fragile thing, and when he came through the door there would be a cinnamon roll waiting, and someone who remembered how it felt to be almost forgotten. And in that moment the world would shift again, quietly, softly, beautifully. Just like it always had. Snow had begun to fall again by the time the bakery's front window fogged with the breath of early winter. It came in soft, cotton-like flakes, the kind that coated everything in memory. Caleb leaned against the counter with a cloth in hand, wiping down a tray that didn't really need wiping. It was habit now, his hands never still when the world slowed down. The street outside had quieted to a hush, the kind that made you believe even the cold could hold its breath. He wasn't supposed to be working that morning. Lana had taken over most of the early shifts by now. She'd graduated high school with top marks, received an offer from a culinary program upstate, and spent her summer interning under Caleb's quiet but thorough eye. She was sharper than he'd ever been at her age, faster, more intuitive. The kind of person who remembered a customer's usual order even if they hadn't been in for months. She was exactly the kind of successor Caleb had hoped would one day walk through the door. But old habits died slowly. He found excuses to come in even when he wasn't scheduled. Something to restock, something to check on, a delivery to receive. And Lana, with a smirk that told him she was far wiser than her years let on, never stopped him. He liked that she never said, "You don't have to be here," because she understood. Sometimes the heart doesn't leave a place, even when the hands are ready to rest. The chime above the door rang softly. Caleb looked up to see a girl standing in the entryway, backlit by snow and silence. She was maybe 10, maybe younger. She wore a backpack too big for her shoulders and shoes that leaked snow melt onto the tile. She had no gloves. Her hands trembled slightly as she stepped forward. "Hi," she said. "Are you the owner?" Caleb smiled gently. "One of them, yeah. Can I help you?" She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small folded paper. On it were a few scrawled words. "Do you have anything warm? I only have this." She unfolded her palm and showed 3 coins. Not enough. Not even close. But her eyes said everything. They said hunger, yes, but also hesitation. The kind of cautious dignity that didn't want pity, only permission. Caleb nodded. "I think we can find something." He walked around the counter, opened the display, and picked out a cinnamon roll. The good kind, the ones Lana dusted with cardamom and orange zest on Saturdays. He added a buttered roll, a cup of hot chocolate, and wrapped it all in a brown bag with care. Then, without saying a word, he handed it to her. Her fingers barely closed around the bag before she whispered, "Thank you." "You're welcome," Caleb said, "and if you ever need to come back, you don't have to bring anything but yourself." She nodded, too quickly, and disappeared through the door and into the snow. Caleb stood there a long time, watching the place where she'd vanished. Another story had just walked through his door. That night, Caleb sat alone at his desk. The bakery was quiet. Lana had sent the last of the staff home, and the ovens were cooling down. The only sound was the occasional groan of pipes, adjusting to the night's cold. In his lap sat a leather-bound notebook, worn at the edges, softened by time. On the first page in Mr. H's hand were the words, "Names we should remember." Mr. H had started the list years ago. It was never meant to be published. It wasn't a roster or a file or even a true record, just names, first names, nicknames, sometimes only descriptions. The kid with the red scarf, the girl who left letters, Frank, the man who cried over muffins. Caleb had added his own names over time. People who mattered. People who came in looking for food, but stayed for something else. People who needed to be seen, even if only once. He turned to a blank page, wrote, "The girl with 3 coins and 2 big shoes," then closed the notebook gently. In the weeks that followed, the girl returned. Her name was Elsie. She spoke more each time, told Lana about her brother, who worked nights, about her mom, who cleaned houses, about how they sometimes skipped dinner so the kids could eat more. Lana made her hot sandwiches. Caleb taught her how to make tea. They gave her a quiet stool in the corner where she could sit after school and read, draw, or just exist without needing to explain. Caleb began keeping a second notebook. This one was for stories. One Friday, a man came in with a cane and an old army jacket. He looked around the bakery with eyes that flickered like candlelight, as though trying to decide if this place was real or just another dream he'd wander through and forget. He ordered nothing, just stood by the wall and stared at the plaque. Caleb approached gently. "You served?" The man nodded. "You hungry?" The man hesitated, then nodded again. Caleb handed him a cinnamon roll, a hot drink, and an envelope with $20 in it. "No strings," he said. The man took it like it was made of glass. Before he left, he looked at Caleb and said, "This place, it's like someone remembered how to care." Spring came again. The garden box outside bloomed. Lavender, rosemary, a single tomato plant someone had donated as a joke but had somehow taken root. Lana prepared to leave for her culinary program. On her last day, she left Caleb a note. It read, "I came here because I needed a job. I stayed because I found home. Thank you for showing me what that means." Caleb stood alone the next morning just before the shop opened. He lit the ovens, rolled out the dough, watched the sky turn pink with a new sunrise. Another Tuesday, another chance. The bell over the door rang at 7:12 a.m. A boy entered. No coat, thin arms, 2 fast eyes. He placed a few coins on the counter, said nothing. Caleb handed him a cinnamon roll. Nothing else needed to be said. Because that's what Cornerstone was. Not just a bakery, not just a building, but a promise that no one who walked through that door would ever be invisible again. The sun came later now. Mornings lingered in a blue hush that settled over the rooftops like a heavy quilt. In the bakery, the warm light from the ovens painted golden rectangles across the floor long before the sky agreed to brighten. Caleb was already there, same as always, though now his movements carried a slower rhythm, not tired, just deliberate, like someone who had learned that not every step had to be rushed. He stood in the back kitchen, running his thumb along the edge of a rolling pin that had belonged to Mr. H's father. It was older than anyone working in the shop, worn smooth by decades of repetition. Caleb always kept it on the shelf above the flour bins, not because he used it, but because it reminded him that things could last, that things built with care often outlived those who made them. The bell over the front door rang faintly. Caleb didn't need to look. He already knew. Elsie. She came in every Thursday now, always just before school. Her backpack looked lighter these days. Her cheeks had color again. She smiled more. That morning, she had a small bandage on her left knuckle and an ink smudge across the back of her hand. "Writing again?" Caleb asked, setting a warm pastry bag on the counter. Elsie nodded. "Poetry." "About?" She shrugged. "Being seen?" Caleb smiled. "That's a good thing to write about." She took the bag and looked up at him with something like gravity in her expression. "Can I leave it here someday? The poems, I mean. Just in case someone needs them." Caleb nodded. "We'll make a shelf for them." That afternoon, when the bakery was quiet again and only the hum of the refrigerator filled the background, Caleb took out a wooden box from beneath the counter. Inside were things that had no names, scraps of paper, old customer notes, a half-broken keychain shaped like a lighthouse. He added the first of Elsie's poems. It was written on notebook paper, folded 3 times, and it read, "I was a corner no one swept. Now I'm a window someone opened." Caleb placed it gently among the other items. The box wasn't labeled. It didn't need to be. Months passed like pages turning in a well-loved book. Caleb trained a new staff, a local youth named Marcus who'd grown up in foster care and always walked a little too quickly, like he expected the ground to disappear behind him. Another girl, Riley, barely 16, who said nothing during her first week except yes and okay, but who eventually began leaving sticky notes in the break room with questions like, "Do birds remember where they came from?" They were quiet, awkward, a little scared. They were perfect. Caleb didn't rush them. He gave them roles without counting change and gave them time without asking why they needed it. Over time, they became part of the rhythm, learning the register, slicing the bread, dusting the tops of muffins with powdered sugar until it looked like first snow. Then came the day the bakery caught fire. It wasn't dramatic, no roaring blaze, no sirens screaming through the dawn, just a short in the wiring, a pop and hiss of smoke near the back ovens, and a slow, creeping flame that kissed the wall too long before anyone noticed. It was Lana, home for a weekend visit, who smelled it first. Caleb was in the front, wiping down tables, when she shouted his name. They moved fast, shut off power, called it in. The fire department came, stomped in with heavy boots, doused everything in chemicals, and declared it contained. But the damage was done. The back wall was blackened. The air smelled like grief. They stood outside on the sidewalk after the smoke cleared, shoulders hunched against the wind. "Guess we'll be closed for a while," Caleb said softly. Lana looked at him. "You okay?" He nodded. "Just tired." She didn't ask if he meant that moment or the years that came before. He didn't need to say. News of the fire spread fast. By evening, someone had taped a sign on the door. "We will wait." By morning, there were 20 more. Sticky notes, scrap paper, cards tucked into the frame. "We miss the rolls? We miss you more?" "My daughter learned how to feel safe here. Thank you. I came here when my husband died. You remembered my name." Caleb read every one, twice, and then he went home, pulled out a fresh sheet of paper, and started drafting a rebuild plan. It took 3 weeks, and the community rallied. Contractors volunteering time, students running cleanup, customers donating paint, hardware, and long hours. Mr. H came out of retirement and showed up in boots and a tool belt, pretending he didn't ache from every step. When they reopened, there was no grand relaunch, no ribbon cutting, just Caleb standing behind the counter, flour on his shirt, eyes bright with the kind of quiet pride that speaks louder than applause. The first customer through the door wasn't a reporter. It was Elsie. She handed him a fresh poem and a single coin. Just one, because she wanted to remember where she started. The bakery returned, not exactly the same, but better. Not flashier, not newer, just steadier. The walls held a different energy now, like they knew something, like they had heard enough stories to speak without words. Caleb added shelves in the back, tiny ones, filled with folded papers and handwritten letters. He called it the Corner Cabinet. People began leaving things there. A note from a brother who never came home, a recipe from a grandmother no one remembered, a bus pass used to escape something no child should ever endure. Each item carefully placed, each one a whisper. I was here. One morning, Caleb came in to find a boy sitting on the front step, younger than most, thin wrists, dirt under his nails. He looked up but didn't move when Caleb unlocked the door. "You open?" the boy asked. Caleb looked at the time, 6:42 a.m. "Not officially," he said, "but for you, yeah." He let him in. The boy sat near the heater, rubbing his hands together. Caleb made 2 cups of tea, placed one beside him. They sat in silence. Finally the boy asked, "You ever sleep outside?" Caleb nodded. "You ever think you'd still be outside?" He nodded again. The boy didn't cry, but his shoulders dropped. "You want to help out today?" Caleb asked. The boy looked up. "What would I do?" "Anything you want, or nothing at all." The boy stood. "Can I wipe the tables?" Caleb smiled. "That's a great place to start." Spring came again, and with it, more coins, more poems, more kids who didn't know where else to go, more adults who had forgotten what it meant to be remembered. And always behind the counter, Caleb stood, older now, a little slower, but still there, not because he had to be, but because the stories hadn't stopped arriving, because there was still one more cinnamon roll to give, one more child who needed to be seen, one more reminder that kindness, once planted, grows roots that stretch generations. And long after the last customer had gone home, long after the counters had been wiped down and the lights turned low, the small wooden box beneath the register remained, full of names, full of the corners swept, full of windows opened, because somewhere someone would walk through the door tomorrow, and someone else would remember what it meant to welcome them in. The last Tuesday of the year came with a gentle snow that clung to the awnings and curled in the corners of windows like frost-tipped ivy. The streets were quieter than usual, not from silence, but from a kind of stillness that only came when the year was preparing to turn its final page. In the bakery, the heat from the ovens breathed into every corner, softening the air with the scent of vanilla, yeast, and slow-roasted apples. Caleb arrived early, earlier than usual. The building creaked around him as he stepped inside, pipes groaning in the walls, the hum of old wires waking from slumber. He flicked on the lights, one switch at a time, as if greeting each bulb like an old friend. It had been nearly 2 decades since the day he first walked into Cornerstone Bakery and placed coins on the counter, 2 decades since the roll, the silence, the question that had never been asked but had been answered all the same. He ran his hand across the wooden counter, the finish smoothed from years of elbows, notes, and folded paper bags. The place had grown. More staff, more shelves, a second seating area, a community board covered in hand-pinned photos and prayers, but at its heart, it was still the same. It was still a place where stories paused to catch their breath, where people became visible again. At 7:12 a.m., the door chimed, right on time. A teenager stood just inside, stomping snow off boots, cheeks red from wind. Caleb didn't know him yet, but he could see the story already forming in the kid's posture, the way his eyes flicked between the menu and the floor like he was preparing to walk away before anyone noticed he'd arrived. Caleb stepped forward. "First time in?" The boy nodded. "Yeah, I heard you might be hiring?" Caleb studied him. His shoes were worn but clean. He held a folded paper in his hand, maybe a resume, maybe something else entirely. "We might be," Caleb said. The boy held out the paper. "I haven't worked anywhere before, just helped my uncle fix up stuff. I'm not great with people, but I'm trying." Caleb didn't take the paper. Instead, he pointed toward a corner booth. "Sit, warm up. There's a roll coming your way in about 4 minutes. Then we'll talk." The boy hesitated, then sat. That afternoon, after the lunch rush, Caleb stepped into the back room. It wasn't just an office anymore. It was part archive, part studio, part memory. On the far wall was a collage that had started as a photo of Mr. H and had expanded across the years. Photos of former staff, letters, notes, drawings from kids who used to sit at the front table and now had kids of their own. At the center of it all was a framed piece of notebook paper, Elsie's first poem. "I was a corner no one swept. Now I'm a window someone opened." Caleb stared at it for a long moment, then turned, opened the small wooden box under the desk, and removed a notebook he hadn't written in for years. The cover was cracked. The pages smelled faintly of cinnamon and age. He opened to a new page and wrote, "The boy who asked to try didn't ask for mercy. Didn't ask for praise, just asked for a chance. He closed the book and returned it to its place. On New Year's Eve, the town square was filled with lights. Strings of bulbs crisscrossed between lamp posts. A small stage had been erected near the fountain, where local performers took turns singing old folk songs, jazz tunes, and once a surprisingly soulful rendition of Auld Lang Syne by a kid who couldn't have been more than 11. Caleb stood near the back of the crowd, hands in his coat pockets, watching the glow settle across the faces of neighbors, friends, strangers. Somewhere nearby, Elsie, now in college, was reciting poetry on a makeshift platform. Lana stood beside her, holding a candle, still smelling faintly of baked dough from the new Cornerstone branch she now ran with her partner. Marcus was taking pictures with a borrowed camera, saying he wanted to start a photography page called The People We Miss When We Don't Look Up. And Riley? She was speaking with the mayor about starting a city program to offer part-time jobs to homeless youth. All around him were the echoes of old stories grown into new lives. At midnight the bells rang, and instead of cheering, the crowd grew quiet. It was Lana who stepped forward and took the mic. She didn't say much, just this: there are places in this world where we are taught to survive, and then, if we're lucky, we find places that teach us how to live. She turned and looked into the crowd, straight at Caleb. And sometimes we walk into a bakery and we come out with a life. The crowd applauded. Caleb didn't. He just nodded once, slowly, his throat too full to speak. The next morning he arrived early again. Old habits. He flipped the sign to "Open" at 7:12. And there, waiting on the doorstep, was a folded paper bag. No name, just a small cinnamon roll inside. And under it, a single coin. A token, not of debt, not of need, but of gratitude. A tribute from someone who had walked through the door long ago, or maybe only yesterday. And in that moment, Caleb didn't need a ceremony. He didn't need a plaque, or an article, or a film crew, or a headline. He only needed this: a quiet bakery, a warm oven, and the knowledge that somewhere out there someone else had chosen to live. All because a long time ago a boy with shaking hands placed coins on a counter, and someone followed him. All the way home. A week after the new year settled into its rhythm, Caleb stood outside the bakery before dawn, the key cold in his hand, his breath coiling in front of him. Snow crunched beneath his boots. The town around him slept, still cloaked in quiet, but he could feel it waking, inch by inch, light by light. He opened the door and stepped inside, letting the warm scent of yeast and old wood wrap around him like an embrace. The heaters hummed softly. The silence inside wasn't empty. It was full of memory, full of meaning, full of everything that had ever happened within those walls. He walked through the bakery slowly, stopped at the table where the old man named Harris used to sit with his blueberry muffin and black coffee, paused near the stool where Elsie had written her poems, brushed his fingers over the corner booth where Riley had once curled up with her sketch pad and drawn the bakery's window from memory, over and over, until the scene felt like part of her bones. Every seat, every surface, every squeaky board on the floor held someone's story, and not a single one of those stories was forgotten. Not here. Later that morning, just as the sunlight began to spread across the frost-covered sidewalks, the door opened and a young woman stepped inside. She was bundled in layers, her dark hair twisted up in a scarf, a messenger bag over her shoulder. She moved with purpose, but something about her eyes told Caleb she wasn't here just for coffee. He greeted her gently. "Cold one today." She nodded, pulled out a small notebook from her bag, and opened it. "I'm doing a story," she said, "for a magazine, a human interest piece on places that still matter." Caleb blinked. "You think this place still matters?" She smiled. "Everyone in town does. I've heard about you, the boy who left coins on the counter, the man who turned kindness into a compass." He almost laughed. "It's not really my story anymore." "But it started with you," she said. Caleb didn't argue. Instead, he poured 2 coffees and handed her one. "Then let's talk," he said. They sat for hours. She asked about the beginning, about Mr. H. About the day he first walked in and laid down a handful of coins, hoping no one would ask too many questions. She asked about the boiler room, about Lana, about the fire, the rebuild, the box under the counter. But what she really wanted to know was why. Why the bakery still welcomed kids who couldn't pay. Why they still accepted IOUs written in pencil. Why there was a quiet envelope tucked behind the counter for emergency rent money, and why no one ever got turned away, even if all they could offer was eye contact and a name. Caleb gave her the same answer he gave anyone who asked, "Because someone did it for me." She closed her notebook and stared out the window. "I think we've forgotten how to build places like this," she said. "No," Caleb said. "We've just forgotten how to wait for them to grow." That night, he stayed late. The bakery had closed. The chairs were turned upside down on tables. The lights were low. He unlocked the cabinet in the back and pulled out the old wooden box. Inside, the pages had grown thick over the years. Folded notes, letters, small objects with no monetary value, but a wealth of meaning. The weight of all those quiet, sacred things made his hands tremble. He turned to a blank page and wrote, "Today a reporter came and asked me why this place still matters. I didn't know how to say it exactly, so I said it's not mine, it's theirs. It always was. I just turned on the lights. They filled the room. They brought their fears, their silence, their trembling hands, and they stayed. They trusted. And trust, that's something worth keeping warm." He set the book back in its place, then stood in the darkened shop and looked out at the moonlit snow. Somewhere, someone was deciding whether or not to ask for help tomorrow. Somewhere, someone was holding coins in their hand and debating whether to spend them on food or save them to prove they were trying. Somewhere, a kid who thought they didn't matter was walking past the bakery windows and wondering if the world had a place for them. And if they came through the door, there would be a cinnamon roll. There would be warmth. There would be a man who had been there, who still remembered, and who always, always would. The years that followed brought change, as years do. The bakery grew, more branches, more stories, but the original shop remained. Same door, same bell, same smell, and behind the counter always someone trained in the quiet art of noticing. Trained by Caleb, taught not how to sell but how to see, and on the wall above the register, hung in a frame made from salvaged wood and dusted with flour every morning, was a single sheet of paper, yellowed with age, creased but never forgotten, the original poem. "I was a corner no one swept. Now I'm a window someone opened." And next to it, "Leave your coin, take your place, you belong." Because you always did. You just needed someone to follow you long enough to prove it.